Hello, welcome. It's been a while. Since I made a video like this. But in light of the so-called revelations of Matt Hancock and others in the UK government regarding what's called the lockdown files, on the back of Isabel Oakeshott's expose of what went on, I felt the need to say a few words because the narrative, the mainstream narrative, and a lot of the narrative, even on the alternative side, I think is missing some important points, whether intentionally or unintentionally, or they don't understand what's going on. But the summary of the WhatsApp revelations, the fact that it was Project Fear, people were frightened deliberately, and one of the kind of strains of the response go on the lines of, we have to really look at the use of applied psychology, and should it be used in this way, and we have to revisit our ethics. Well, as I'll hopefully I'll go on to discuss, I don't buy this minimisation. I don't buy it. And another reason why, in the mainstream, the politicians, Nadine Dorries, for example, she has been on Twitter today talking about how she challenged all this Project Fear, but she was shut down by Labour, and she called shame on everyone for supporting this. Well, of course, I contacted Nadine Dorries several times, warning her that these policies were going to be harmful, unethical, and illegal. Of course, I was ignored. So I don't buy this rats on a sinking ship bullshit, frankly. And it's disgusting, frankly. So where was I going with this? I've got a few notes here. So the offshoot of all this, there's articles been written about it, Telegraph, mainstream newspapers. There's other commentators on the alternative side, and I think an important point. It's maybe some have picked this up, but I haven't seen it as yet. So the cry for the use of applied psychology has been used by Hancock et al. Is disgusting. It's harmful. We're all subject to Project Fear. It should never happen again. We've got them by the balls now. We've exposed them. No. It's not been exposed. I think this theatre of the Hancock WhatsApp revelations are just that. It's theatre. Just theatre to give the masses a little bit of biscuit, a little bit of cake. Let them eat cake. This is what because right. During the pandemic, everyone's heard about SPY-B of Sage, the applied behavioural psychologists, who are the architects of the Project Fear. To make people more frightened than they should be, the non-compliant, and to use shaming tactics to, make them comply with the regulations. And Professor Susan Michie was a member of SPY-B, who advised Hancock et al. Well, Professor Susan Michie is now the head of behavioural psychology with the World Health Organization. Now, for those of you who don't know this, the World Health Organization are trying to push through a treaty at this very moment, which will be implementing exactly the same use of applied psychology that was used in the UK during the last 3 years. Now, so that's one thing. So there's no contrition. They're quite willing to go along with the UK government. Seem to be quite happy and willing to go along with this WHO treaty. It's got to be sorry, just to get my quote here. They're going along with this WHO treaty, which will be using applied psychology, with one of the chief architects of SAGE, Professor Susan Michie. So this abusive psychology, unethical, it's not going away anytime soon. Now, delve a little deeper. As I discussed on the UK Column News a few weeks ago, I reviewed a document by the Climate Change Committee, and it was a House of Lords document published in October 2022. Yeah, 2022. And in that document, they praised the use of applied psychology as used during the COVID pandemic. Right? I'll just read you a summary from the document. This is from the summary of the Climate Change Committee document. This is for net zero, for the climate. And I should say that the WHO Treaty, this is what I want to say, the WHO Treaty, they want to use climate change, climate emergency as a public health issue. So they want to use applied psychology in the service of going for net zero. This is why it's not going away. Now, back to the climate change document. This is a summary of it by the UK government. The twin crises of climate change and nature loss demand an immediate and sustained response. The government has committed to reaching net zero by 2050 and to leave the environment in a better condition for future generations. People power is critical to meet those targets. And where does it go here? Polling shows that the public is ready for leadership from the government in this space. The government should provide clarity to individuals on how the changes we need to make in how we travel, what we eat, what we buy, how we use energy at home, and should articulate the many co-benefits to health, well-being, and taking those steps to do this. Behavioural science, evidence and best practice show that a combination of policy levers including regulation and fiscal incentives must be used by government alongside clear communication. A behavioural lens must be applied consistently across all government departments. And I'm trying to find the bit where they praise the COVID I can't find here it is. Psychological models include COM-B, capability, opportunity, motivation, which was developed as a synthesis of other models by Susan Michie and colleagues from University College London, UCL, and this guy, Mr. Park, who's being quoted here, says, for a new behaviour to arise, people generally need to have sufficient capability to enact the behaviour, which includes the physical capability to do it, the means and the time and so on. The opportunity to do it, in other words, whether that choice is readily available to them, socially normative and so on, and the motivation to do it. And where is it? Well, anyways, the Climate Change Committee praised the use of applied psychology as used during the COVID pandemic. So if it's such an abhorrent practice, why do they want to adopt it for climate net zero? Now you see, the next thing I wanted to say was about the 15-minute cities. That's been going on, the debate about 15-minute cities, and people have been protesting about this in Oxford and Bath and other places, in Edinburgh. It's coming up. People are criticising it, and again, people are there's a lot of protests about it and are scared about this because it'll be like a loss of freedom, it'll be climate lockdowns, and of course the critics are saying, oh, this is just conspiracy theories, and no such thing will occur. But when you look at the coalescing of the WHO Treaty on one hand, using climate emergency, which will be legally binding for any sort of interventions by WHO, and the use of applied psychology, and then the praising of behavioural psychology by the Climate Change Committee of the UK government, and then the 15-minute cities and the ULEZ areas, etc., on one hand. When these three things coalesce, the WHO Treaty, the Climate Change Committee, the local authority, 15-minute neighbourhoods, you have got the legal, governmental powers, levers for control of the population, and then add a few layers on top of that: digital currency, carbon footprint score, social credit score, etc. You've got the recipe, and of course they're coming at different angles. So a local council can say, "Oh, we're not doing climate lockdown," but then the WHO Treaty is coming down the line. But why isn't the local authority, why aren't the local authorities saying, oh yeah, by the way, there's a WHO Treaty coming, and if there's a climate emergency, you will be locked in your area because it's a public health issue. Oh, your digital currency's been cut off because you've travelled too many miles. Your social credit score says you can't travel, and the WHO says as a public health emergency, you're going to have to stop travelling for a few months. This is where it's leading. So, the faux outrage of Matt Hancock and the use of Project Fear and applied psychology, I just do not buy it. I do not buy it. Now, another thing that is really, really irking me. No, there's the outrage of Matt Hancock and his WhatsApp, by mainstream, by even alternative. But what they're not emphasising enough is that the use of applied psychology is a crime. It is a crime. First of all, coercion's a crime. The Scottish Government think coercion's a crime. Here is coercion from the Scottish Government website. Controlling behaviour is a range of acts designed to make a person subordinate and or dependent by isolating them from the sources of support, exploiting their resources and capacities for personal gain, depriving them of the means needed for independence, resistance and escape, and regulating their everyday behaviour. Coercive behaviour is a continuing act or a pattern of acts of assault, threats, humiliation, intimidation, or other abuse that is used to harm, punish, or frighten their victim. Think of all the lockdown restrictions, stopping people work, stopping people see their family, friends, the use of threats, humiliation, coercion, vaccine passports, vaccine mandates in the NHS. And in light of that, Matt Hancock and what he's been saying, let's frighten them, let's release the new variant, blah blah blah. This is coercion. This is a crime. Matt Hancock, as far as I can see, is still a sitting MP in the UK Parliament. All the other people involved are still in their posts. Ordinarily, if someone was being abusive or coercive, they'd be arrested. Susan Mitchie gets promoted to the head of the World Health Organization Behavioural Psychology Unit. Lots of punishment there, eh? Lots of punishment. So, you know, this is What's this? This is from. Yeah, these are some examples of coercion: isolating a person from their family and friends, depriving them of their basic needs, monitoring a person via online, enforcing rules and activity which humiliate, degrade, or dehumanise the victim. Think about how we weren't allowed to sit next to a grieving relative at a funeral who had to be socially distanced. Threats to hurt or kill. Well, threats to stop you, shut your business, fine you for opening it in lockdown. Threats to a child. You'll kill your granny if you don't wear a mask for 8 hours a day. And we've known that the masks don't work and they're a lot of rubbish. Nicola Sturgeon's not been arrested for those abuses of power. Oh, it goes on. It just, everyone gets. You get the picture. It's disgraceful. Now, Biderman's chart of coercion. This is an interesting thing in light of what's happened. This Biderman's chart of coercion. Biderman was a psychologist, and he used this chart of coercion. He developed it. It's a tool designed to demonstrate and explain the coercive methods of stress, manipulation used to torture prisoners of war. It's been applied to explain the coercive techniques used by perpetrators of domestic abuse. The list directly reflects the original chart. This list directly reflects the original chart. It's not been changed. And it's used in terms of domestic abuse context as well. So that's extremely terrorising. So one of the methods of coercion is isolation. So you can think of quarantine, bubbles, the bubble of 6, not being able to visit a dying relative in hospital. And the effect is to deprive the victim of all social support, of their ability to resist, to develop an intense concern with self, and makes the victim dependent. Monopolisation of perception. Think of propaganda. The daily, when Whitty and Valance and all that came out, and next slide please. The white coat effect, where the so-called scientist dupes the people, think, oh, we can trust this person, he's a scientist. So it fixes people's attention upon immediate predicament. It eliminates information not in compliance with demands. Think of the online harm bill wanting to go through. Think of the censorship on social media that occurred, banning people from YouTube, banning people from Twitter during this time. And it punishes independence or resistance. Censorship, cancel culture. Humiliation, degradation is another method. Masks, marks on the floor, hand sanitizer. It makes resistance. It's to make resistance easier, less easy, and the act of submission to these silly rules. Exhaustion is another method. So we've had 3 years of this. It's not ending. We have the climate crisis, so-called climate crisis now. We have the war in Ukraine. We have the cost of living. And this method is to weaken mental and physical ability to resist. Threats is another method. Well, think of the threats that we got. Killing your granny, shut your business or you'll be fined. And the actors in the government narrative talking about how we should be quarantined or never allowed on the streets. Mr. Pimlico Plumbers got airtime to say these things, demonising people who enacted their informed consent not to take an experimental vaccine, which was only on emergency approval, and which had no long-term safety data. And when it's now shown to be, there are indications that, in Yellow Card, for example, that harms have occurred. YouTube can't censor me for that because the harms have occurred from a result of taking the mRNA shots for COVID-19 and deaths. This is fact, and YouTube can't censor me for that. So forcing trivial demands, yeah, well, masks as well. That's another method. But you get the picture. I tell you what, I've written articles about this. Getting to the point where I'm kind of I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot. But the psychologists 5B who sat on Sage, they know about informed consent to psychological interventions. For there's a whole document in the British Psychological Society's ethics. There's pages of it of indicating that if there's any harm involved, any coercion involved, if consent is not given freely, this I'm reading from the document, by the client or whoever, in compliance to authority figures, that's a no-no. Equally, a client may say that they understand the explanation given by the psychologist and accept a plan for intervention. In order to avoid the discomfort of being seen not to understand the psychologist's complex language and ideas. So people may have went along with things even, saying they do consent, but they might not even understand. So when they started throwing out the regulations and the restrictions, did Joe and Jane Public, do they really understand what's going on? No. They're actually being ruled by fear and coercion. And Patrick Valence's and Chris Whitty's, next slide please, that very vague and not clear information was designed, I think, to confuse people and to obfuscate the actual true state of affairs, the actual deaths that would go or lack of them. It was manipulation. It was an abuse of science to get the desired result. Now, I recently gave a talk. I presented my testimony, which I was very happy to do so, to the German Corona Investigative Committee, and I was very happy to do so because they are trying to make a case internationally to take the perpetrators of these crimes, to get them into court, essentially, because I still think this is what's been happening as a crime. And I mentioned the use of applied psychology historically. For example, in East Germany, under the Stasi, they used applied psychology, very similar methods to what's been used in COVID. And essentially, the use of fear was used, intended to shake self-confidence, undermine self-esteem, generate fear, confusion and mistrust. The often long-term subliminal repressions in public and private life were and still are extremely difficult for the victims to prove. Goes on here. It goes on here. What is it? Amnesty International called on therapists and psychology organisations to take action against abuse of this kind, of abuse of applied psychology, and to argue for the recognition of mental integrity as a human right, and to provide psychosocial care as part of subsequent treatment as a matter of course in cases of human rights violations. This is Amnesty International in 2009. Where has Amnesty International been in 2020, 21, 22 and now with the use of applied psychology globally? UK, Ireland, Canada, Europe. Where have they been? Right? This is from an article about the Stasi. It's called Psychologists' Involvement in the Repressive Stasi Secret Police Activities in Former East Germany. It's quoting from the article here. International psychology organisations from early on in the post-World War II times adopted codes on professional ethics. Post-war Germany, this was first supported by Kurt Bondy, 1959, one of the very few something, I can't remember the words blurred, in academic psychology. Today, the Meta-Ethic Code of Ethics by the European Federation of Psychological Associations provides advice on ethical behaviour in theory and practice for European psychologists. This meta-code advocates the respect for a person's right and dignity, above all, and promotes the competence, responsibility and integrity of psychologists in their professional behaviour. Responsibility in particular defines avoidance of harm and continuity of care in a professional way for clients. However, such aspects were suppressed under the so-called operative psychology of the Stasi. And they've been suppressed, the avoidance of harm, under the COVID regime. People have been harmed, deliberately so. You know, so after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when the so-called human rights organisations saying, oh, we should have no abusive psychology, look at America, the United States. American psychological associations, talking about Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, they highlighted the issue that psychologists affiliated with armed forces are particularly prone to adopt unethical professional conduct by conforming to military rules. This is supported by the operative psychology. As staff, all staff at the Stasi Academy in Potsdam had military ranks, with full professors and chairs being appointed as colonels. So basically, the use of applied psychology was used in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib. And interestingly, pictures of people in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib, they made the prisoners wear face masks. And that again, I keep harking back to that. That was no accident. That sensory deprivation and social deprivation, because people couldn't see each other's faces clearly. They would be investigating the effects of face masks on controlling this population of prisoners and the psychological effects on them. And again, what's been shown is the face masks are useless. Project Fear was happening. They used face masks. The whole population's been put under a psychological torture with what's going on. A crime. They conclude this article by saying, we conclude with a general statement to the international psychology that there must be a total ban on abusing psychology as described, and also hopefully a system where people are held to account for breaching these ethics, not only in the professional community but in the society at large. The overarching goal for our profession remains what the United Nations Sustainable Goal 16 refers to as promoting peaceful and inclusive societies, providing access to justice for all, and of course, do no harm. Well, all these organisations, all the European psychology organisations, all the psychotherapy organisations in the UK, the main ones, mental health charities, politicians, promoted Project Fear and have promoted it. And they're saying nothing about the incoming WHO treaty coming with the abuse of psychology. They're saying nothing about the abuse of the net zero totalitarianism. Where does one go with this? It's absolutely exhausting, really. I've got a quote from, I think it sums up what this all, because this is evil. The use of abusive psychology on people, and this full contrition, the full outrage over Matt Hancock and his psychology, and yet it's still got to be continuing. And no doubt Matt Hancock will still be an MP, as though nothing has happened. And Professor Susan Mitchie et al., there'll be nothing happen to them. They won't be penalised in any sense in their career or nothing. So this is a very interesting book. It's by Ivan Alexandrovich Ilyin, a Russian author, and a book called On Resistance to Evil by Force. He wrote this book in response to Tolstoy, who was an extreme pacifist, to, we shouldn't fight back. But anyways, whether he believed in that or not, but this is his ideas on people's non-resistance to this evil. I think it's very interesting what he says. So I'm quoting him now. In the very approach to the problem, it is necessary to establish with clarity that no one among honest people thinks of or undertakes non-resistance to evil in the literal sense of the phrase, and that one's tendency to such non-resistance transforms a person from a moral doctor and spiritual subject into a moral patient and an object of spiritual education. So in other words, if people have shown no resistance to the evil that's going on so far, they lose their status as a kind of spiritual subject or moral patient, a moral doctor or spiritual subject, and they become a patient. They become ill by their compliance and their complicity. Hence, such people will not discuss the problems of non-resistance, but already about perpetrators there will be dispute. So look at Nadine Dorris, talking about shame on you all for supporting this horrible fear that's hurt people. She's ready to cast the aspersions of perpetrators like a rat on a sinking ship. She must have the biggest brass neck that's ever been created in human history. She says, so Ilyin goes on, what exactly is to be done with them, and how exactly should one resist them, these people who are complicit? And he goes on, in fact, what would non-resistance mean in the sense of absence of any resistance? This would mean accepting evil, letting it in and giving it freedom and scope and power. If, under these conditions, the uprising of evil occurred and non-resistance continued, it would mean subordination to it, a surrender of the self to it, participation in it, and finally turning oneself into its instrument, into its body, into its cesspool, into its plaything, and an absorbed element thereof. So what Ilyan's saying there is, non-resistance, whether through silence or fear of speaking up, destroys one, essentially. It turns, you become the plaything of evil itself. You've got to remember the other Russian author, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, said, talking about good and evil, we shouldn't think of evil being out there by done with other people, and that we can be good and there's good people and then evil. He says evil runs through the heart of every single human being. We have the potential for good, but we also have the potential for evil. And one of the potential for evils is cowardice and silence and complicity. And if we give in and show no resistance, then we become evil's plaything. We court evil. And so he goes on. But this is why the total absence of all resistance, both external and internal, requires that condemnation be stopped, so that censure will cease, so that the approval of evil will prevail. So the minimization of what the Hancock revelations and etc. and the use of applied psychology, in a sense, by not paying attention to other things going on or not mentioning them, in a sense, there is a kind of underlying wish for the wish for the evil to prevail, to keep going. You know, therefore the non-resistor of evil sooner or later arrives at the need to assure himself that the evil is not so bad, and that it is not so definitely evil, that it has some positive features, that there are many of them, that they may even predominate. So, essentially, you'll hear some people saying, oh well, I mean, although the psychology was bad and people were hurt, we saved lives and we got the vaccine out, and what is the lesser of two evils? Maybe there's some good in it. We nudged people in the right direction, really. So this is what you say. This is the spiritual law, Elian says. The non-resistor to evil is absorbed by it and becomes possessed. For evil is not an empty word, not an abstract concept, not a mere logical possibility, and not a result of subjective evaluation. Evil is first and foremost the spiritual inclination of man, inherent in each of us, as if for some living within us there is a passionate desire to embridle the beast inside, a gravitation that always strives to expand its field and overtake us completely. So, that's what's happening now. This hype and full outrage of Hancock and his revelations, and all these people scrambling to cultivate a narrative, whether to excuse themselves from any wrongdoing, to minimize it in some sense, like, oh, let's really look at psychology, ethics. We need to look at our ethics. What did we do wrong? Number one, when it comes to psychology or psychotherapy organisations, they know fine well the ethics of coercion, of manipulation, of psychological abuse. They went along with what was going on. They went along with it because look back to the major organisations and their social media profiles. They went along with all that. So don't believe in the minimisers, and don't believe in the faux contrition. Keep in mind the theatre of it and the fact that the WHO treaties in the pipeline want to bring climate emergency as a public health thing, which we will be legally obliged to follow if the WHO treaty goes through. This will collide with the Climate Change Commission and the Net Zero agenda and the 15-minute neighbourhoods and all the rest of the climate totalitarianism, which will be using exactly the same psychology and faux science as before. Think of the online harms bill and the censorship, the social media credit, social carbon footprint credit, etc., in digital currency. This is not going away, and it's encompassed by evil. So be very sceptical of what you're seeing on social media about this full outrage of Matt Hancock, because it doesn't. I don't buy it. It does not even scratch the surface. You know, people knew back in 3 years ago it was abusive. The politicians were warned. They ignored it. And in these people who come out who were very late to the game and went, "Oh, I got it wrong. I pushed masks, I pushed vaccines, I pushed lockdowns. Oh, look at the data, I got it wrong." No, I don't buy that either. I don't buy it. Because ordinary people with no scientific background, who, you know, which doesn't mean they're any less intelligent, by the way. There's a lot of educated idiots out there at the moment, as the last 3 years have shown. People with a bit of common sense can look at data, can look at the world with their own eyes and see that bullshit is going down. And they saw it, but they were demonised. I was demonised. I was called a conspiracy theorist you know, and a spreader of fake news by fellow therapists and psychologists. Well, am I meant to celebrate and say I told you so? Well, no, I don't celebrate, because the same bullshit's happening now with this smoke and mirrors with the WHO Treaty and the climate change. So I'm going to say it now. The use of applied psychology is still being used, and they're being let off the hook. But then again, I'll now be called a conspiracy theorist for the second time, and a spreader of fake news for a second time. Well, so be it. But this is my resistance to evil, and I'll stand by it. And there'll be many more people who are again complicit. Well, they'll be judged. They'll be judged in the end, according to the alien, judged by God. And to walk that path at the moment is a hard one, but it's a glorious time to be alive. Glorious time. So I think that's it, really. Thanks for listening to my rant. Take care. Speak to you soon.